Good evening. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, answering your questions tonight. Chair of Australian Super and board member of the Reserve Bank, Heather Ridout. Social justice advocate, CEO of St Vincent de Paul, Dr John Falzon. Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss. Labor Senate leader Penny Wong and the leader of the Palmer United Party, Clive Palmer. Please welcome our panel. Right, Q&A is simulcast on ABC News 24 and News Radio. You can join the Twitter conversation using the Quanda hashtag. And remember, if you have a live question, add @Quanda to help us find it. Well, our first question tonight comes from Catherine Wallace.
Mr Hockey says he is so sorry for his comments about poorer Australians and their use of cars. He also stated that he is and has been concerned about the poor for a long time. If Mr Hockey is so genuinely concerned, why then does his budget place the harshest measures on the elderly and the poorest Australians, while only one small temporary tax is being placed on the richest Australians?
Warren Truss, that's for you.
Well, clearly when we set about this budget, we had made a commitment to the Australian people that we would set a new direction where Australia began to live within its means, where we sought to raise sufficient revenue to pay for the costs of running our country. But in addition, we wanted to make sure that our welfare, education, health programs could be sustainable into the future. So what this budget has done has helped shore up an opportunity for us to ensure that there will be a continuation of age pensions and other key programs, that there'll still be increases associated to ensure that the cost of living issues can be appropriately addressed. We've allowed people who are on welfare, lower income earners, to be able to keep the compensation for the carbon tax, even though the carbon tax itself has been abolished. So there's a $550 per family benefit right from the beginning. So there are significant measures there to help lower income people, and we know that the best thing that we can help to support those who are going to need assistance into the future is to have a budget that into the future will be able to afford to pay for the sort of things that they're going to need from their community and from their fellow citizen to ensure their own well-being.
OK, well, that question started with a reference to Joe Hockey saying sorry. Do you accept the fuel excise is more of a burden for poor people than for rich people?
Well, Joe has apologised for what he said. He regrets it, and frankly, I think we should move on. The reality is that fuel excise is an additional cost. No one likes extra costs. This was, however, a cost.
Is it more of a burden for poor people than rich people? Because that was the nub of what got Joe Hockey into trouble.
Well, those who are on lower incomes, the amount they might pay on excess might be a greater proportion of their income than somebody who's on a high income. But the reality is that it depends on what travelling you do, and because it's essentially a tax on distance. So from our perspective, what I think is also important is that this was money that was going to be put aside to build better roads. And that's something that I think all Australians want, and let me say particularly as someone who comes from regional Australia, there is a real determination to do what we can to build a better road system, give ourselves better infrastructure. We'll have to pay for it some way, and fuel excise ensures that those who use the system pay for it.
And it falls harder on your constituents.
The reality is that country people want to see more roads, and they want to see them built well, and they want to make sure that they've got the capacity to travel on them. And they're far better off than they would have been had Labor been re-elected, because Labor was going to put a 7 cents a litre tax on transport fuel as a part of its carbon tax regime. So this is a substantial advance, a substantial improvement for those people who live in regional Australia and what Labor had on offer.
The question was a broad question about the budget and whether it hit the poor harder than wealthy people. John Falzon.
Thank you, Tony, for allowing me to answer this question, and thank you, Catherine, for asking it. And I'd like to, in fact, thank the Treasurer for inadvertently highlighting the fact that class is central to any national debate on inequality. Now, let's put things in context. The unemployed have not seen an increase in real terms to their benefit since 1994. That's a long time. Successive governments have neglected the need to lift the desperately low New Start payment. However, I have to say, in all honesty, that after this budget, I have to say this government seems to be making an art form out of cruelty to the unemployed. This budget has ripped the guts out of what remains of a fair and egalitarian Australia. Why? These measures won't help people into jobs, but they will force people into poverty. You don't help someone into a job by making them poor. Whether you're young, old, a person with a disability, a single mum, you're not going to be helped into a job by being put down. You don't build people up by putting them down. You certainly don't help young people into a job by forcing them to live on fresh air and sunshine for 6 months of every year, forcing them to rely on charities like mine. We'll try and be there for people, but it isn't charity they should have to depend on. It's justice they should be able to count on. And you certainly don't reduce the level of youth unemployment by increasing the level of youth incarceration, because that's what we're going to see. And as the OECD tells us, that well-known left-wing think tank, you don't build a strong economy by increasing the level of inequality.
OK, let's hear what the rest of the panel think about the budget. Ridout.
In my view, there was no way the Treasury could sell that proposition on the basis of it being equitable, because it's not. But like when you do a review of tax, you have equity as a principle, but you may not apply it to every single instrument. But you look at the package as a whole and try and make it equitable. And that's really how you design these structures. I think what's happened with the budget is that there's a number of measures which have objectives which are out of sync with the central objective of the budget, which is to get the budget back on track, which we need to do, and I think everybody agrees with that. So how do you put change the excise arrangements on fuel, which is a small amount of money, in the age of entitlement, but pay a woman $50,000 to have a baby? How do you put a co-payment on with the express purpose? You think of fixing the deficit, but it goes into medical research. I think Stephen Covey, in the great book, The 7 Habits of Smart People, said always start with the end in mind. And I think with this budget, the end in mind's been clouded, it's been inconsistent, but the central objective, which the Deputy Prime Minister's mentioned, we do need to have a medium-term budget strategy. We do need these things. And the fuel excise is economically virtuous. It is not a huge amount of money, but the rest of the system should have been there balancing it off, and it wasn't. And I think it's left the whole thing exposed. And frankly, the Labor Party, and Penny Wong can speak for herself, but I think they want to support this measure. They would have liked to have supported this measure. Now, the Greens, in their inimitable way, stood out against it, which has created all sorts of problems and put the Labor Party between a rock and a hard place. So, I think that the budget strategy has been compromised through inconsistencies and not keeping to the central core project, which is balancing the budget.
Penny Wong.
Well, I think what the question really elicits is the fundamental set of values at the core of the budget. And that's good, because budgets are about values. And when I look at this budget, when Labor looks at this budget, what we see in both the budget measures itself and in some of the arguments which have been used to support the budget by the government, we see values we don't share, and I think most Australians don't share. I mean, you look for fairness and instead you see injustice. You look for how opportunity is being enabled and instead you see privilege being entrenched. That's what this budget is about. That is the value set at the core of the budget. And it is also an incoherent budget, as Heather said, because on the one hand, pensioners are told you have to tighten your belts, but we have a paid parental leave scheme which is exorbitant in terms of its generosity. So my view is that the reason we're still in August talking about this budget is because Australians do not accept the sort of assault on some of those fundamental planks of opportunity that we believe in, whether it's schools, university, whether it's Medicare and its universality, whether it's fairness to pensioners. People don't accept what the government is imposing. Let's remember the context. People were told this wouldn't happen before the election. People were told no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no changes to the pension, no cuts to the ABC, and no new taxes. Every single one of those promises has been broken. It's unsurprising that government is having difficulty getting support either in the Parliament, but more importantly in the Australian community.
Clive Palmer.
You know, this week we celebrated in my part of the woods $20 billion worth of exports from our nickel refinery in Townsville. I can say that I never could have done that, except when I left school, I was on the dole for 4 months. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I needed to get some direction in my life, and I needed that help to help me. I was homeless, living by myself, and I needed some direction. So that was very important in my life. What's wrong with this budget is it's just not fair. It's just not reasonable to people, and all of Australia knows it. We've got to remember that our debt really is 12% of our GDP, and the average debt in the OECD is 73% of GDP. We're the third lowest debt country in the OECD. And what the boffins go on about is the projections. Well, you know, we had the global financial crisis a few years ago. I've been in business for years. Everyone knows the economy changes. We have wars. We have a whole range of things every 4 or 5 years. But all of these people are worried about what happens in 20 or 30 years. You know, I had 4 women come to see me in my electorate office, aged between 68 and 86. And they said that their husbands had always voted Liberal, they'd always voted Liberal, and they didn't vote for me. They'd served in the Second World War, their 3 husbands, who were deceased, the other one in Korea. And they said that their pension is paid to the nursing home, and they get $15 back for incidentals every week. And every Friday, the 4 of them pool their money together, and they go down to Maroochydore Cinema to see a movie, have a coffee, and have a chocolate and come home. But under the co-payment, they can't go to the movies anymore. I didn't get elected to Parliament to take off someone's coffee and chocolate from an old lady that might be here in 3 or 4 years' time. I got elected to look after the people that are here in Australia now, not people that might be here in 20 or 30 years' time. And I don't want to destroy the values of this country. And I assure all Australians that we will stand as the last century of the gate. There will be no co-payment. There will be no changes to the education establishments in Australia. There will be no deregulation of universities. That's why people elected us, and that's what we're going to do.
OK, what about Joe Hockey's fuel tax hike?
Well,
You've just named a number of things. What about the fuel tax hike? That's where that's
I don't want to upset Warren tonight too much, but...
You already have.
Too late.
But the reality of it is, when we got rid of the carbon tax, part of the carbon tax was a rebate on diesel fuel. That's now being reintroduced as a change to excise. So it's about mirrors. The Australian people don't want mirrors, they want the truth. So we won't be voting for that or for the indexation. So
no matter what is said to you, because this is a period of intense negotiation, are you determined to reject all of these things?
On the things I've just mentioned tonight, you can't negotiate because they're the very fabric of the nation that we live in. You can't sell out of Australia, and you can't sell out in the Australian people. OK, Warren Truss, do you want to have another crack at getting him to change his mind? Because there's a whole series of budget measures fundamental to the budget which clearly are not going to get through PUP, at least.
Well, the majority of the budget has already, of course, passed to Parliament. We have supply, and so the significant programs that the government needs to undertake, many of them have already passed. But there are a number of other measures that need to be resolved, and we think that many of these are important for the future of our country. Some of them don't even take effect for quite a few years. So it's a matter of planning and putting things in place so that we can, in some instances, manage the growth in expenditure rather than make any kind of cutbacks now.
Just getting literally to what he just said there, do you accept that you're not going to get through that list of things fundamental to the budget, which Clive Palmer has just said aren't going to get through?
Well, the numbers are the numbers. The new senators have only been in the Parliament for 2 weeks. I think they're still learning, and obviously as they get the chance to be exposed to more of the ideas, learn more of the strategy that's involved, hopefully they'll be prepared to look constructively at issues. Now, Clive mentioned, for instance, that the alternative to a ½ cent a litre increase in fuel excise is to get rid of the diesel fuel rebate scheme. Well, that would be absolutely catastrophic for regional Australia.
Come on, Warren.
And something where we just utterly reject.
This
would add to the costs of agriculture and the cost of moving goods to and from the country, and it is simply not on the table from our perspective. And so that's not somewhere where we're going to go. But clearly, we've been negotiating in my own portfolio and in others with senators whenever they're willing to talk to us, and we'll continue to do that to try and make sure that we've got an agenda for the future that keeps our economy sustainable and helps to ensure that we've got the resources to do the things we need to do as a nation, not just now, but also into the future.
OK, let's go to our next question. It's on the budget as well. It's from Laurie Matthews.
I'm the provider of accommodation services for homeless young people in Sydney. Many of the young people that we work with will have their unemployment benefits cut to zero, their youth allowance cut to zero when they complete their employment training courses. How do we expect our community to survive when we disenfranchise the most vulnerable people in the community further? How do you expect young people to live next week when they have zero income?
Heather Ridout, start with you.
Well, I think you can't expect them to. It'll be damaging for them on a long-term basis. It'll be damaging to our community. I think these measures are ideological and far too harsh. I mean, New Zealand has a 1-month thing. Maybe there's a compromise that the government and the opposition parties can work out, but this is unfair. My sister taught for many years up the Central Coast. She taught many kids that were homeless, as it was. We have very high rates of youth unemployment, 25% in many areas. There aren't enough jobs for the kids. I do believe young people should try and be in training and get skills as much as they can, and government policy needs to support that. But I think just creating perverse incentives isn't the way to do it.
John Falzon.
Thanks very much, Laurie, for your question. I don't believe that we are actually in the throes of a fiscal crisis. But if we go down this path and embrace those kinds of measures that are, as Heather said, ideology dressed up as rationality, if we do that, we will be staring down the barrel of a social crisis. And if you want to know what that looks like, look at Ferguson in the United States now. Martin Luther King once said that a riot is at bottom the language of the unheard. What are we going to do by disenfranchising this group of young people who are desperate to find work? We are going to create a group of very dispossessed, desperate, despondent people. We're going to create a group of people that rather than being placed on the pathway to employment, they're going to be on the pathway to destitution and despair. If that's the kind of society we want, then fine, let's go with this. But if we actually want a society where people are given a fair opportunity to get into work, then the last thing we would be doing is plunging them into poverty and forcing them to choose between charity and crime. Now, let me just say this. The business community has said many a time that the unemployment benefit is so low that it is itself an obstacle to employment participation. If a low unemployment benefit is an obstacle to participation, what's no unemployment benefit?
Warren Truss.
Well, John, you should then be very pleased with the items in the budget that actually provide positive incentives for people to work. Now, for those people there are bonuses there for those people who get a job and keep it. There are subsidies for employers who take on an older person and put them into the workplace. We've got training programs, work for the dole programs, designed to support people who have not been able to get their first job, to get the skills that will enable them to to get a career and a start for themselves. Now, you said and others have said the best thing you can do for a person who's unemployed is to get them a job. That is certainly our philosophy. There are positions in Australia, there are work in areas like my own, where we cannot get Australians who are prepared to do these sorts of jobs, so we have to bring in people on 457 visas, comparatively unskilled work like fruit picking, like working in abattoirs, etc. Now, we have to bring people in from other parts of the world to do that sort of work. I would far prefer young Australians to be doing those jobs and taking the opportunities. I know it's not their dream job, but we can't all start off with our dream job. Clive didn't start off with his dream job. He had to work his way to a stage where he's got more money than most of us. And that's the kind of thing that we ought to be encouraging people to do.
OK, well, since you're talking directly to John Falzon, you can answer that briefly.
First of all, while someone is unemployed, there's absolutely no reason why they should be plunged below the poverty line. That's the first thing. And there are a raft of measures in this budget that are going to make life a hell of a lot harder if you are unemployed. You're going to be plunged further below the poverty line. So I don't accept the argument that any of these measures are going to help people into jobs. Secondly, I'm tired of the moralising language that demonises young people particularly, but many unemployed, blaming them as if they are the ones that need to change their behaviour in order to get a job. You know, this isn't about morality, this is about mathematics, and the mathematics are very simple. There are around 150,000 job vacancies in Australia and about 1.5 million unemployed plus underemployed people looking for a job. Do the maths. Forget about the morality. I'm not very good at either, by the way.
I'm just going to go back to our questioner because he has his hand up. Go ahead.
Mr Truss, I think it's about how are you going to survive next week when you have zero income? What are you going to do?
Well, clearly we have to have a range of programs to support people through the periods when they're not able to find work. I accept that there are some people who've been unable to find a job who are trying very hard, and those are the kinds of people we want to support through our Work for the Dole program and others.
Warren Truss, can I just interrupt just for a moment, because is the plan, here's one of the elements that some people argued was too tough. The young unemployed having to apply for 40 jobs. Is it a week? A month? A month. 40 jobs a month. Now, how can you actually do that, plus everything else you need to do to train and so on?
Well, it's always been acknowledged that will not be practical in some instances. If you're the only employer in a little country town,
but is that going to be a rule?
Little country town, and everybody's turning up and 40 times in the month to ask for the same job, well, clearly that's not going to work.
So is that going to be a rule, or is that not going to be a rule?
The intention is that there be an element of flexibility within these sorts of programs. That's been made absolutely clear in relation to these sorts of tests. What we want to do is to make sure that people genuinely seek to obtain jobs where they're available, that we don't have situations where we've got jobs where we've got to bring people from overseas because Australians don't want to do the work.
40 applications per month. Has that been shelved?
No, but what we've said is that there'll be flexibility surrounding it.
Penny Wong.
What's the flexibility in having people have no income? You don't get anything. I don't see what flexibility there is.
Well, the flexibility was about the 40 job application requests, and in circumstances where that's not practical. That's the question that was asked of me, and that's what I responded to.
I've been on this program before, where some of Labor's mutual obligation has been criticised, and John's criticised some of our approaches in government. Fair enough. Yeah, I'm not opposed to mutual obligation. I am opposed to saying to people, we want you to live on charity. That's what we as the government of Australia want to do. We're going to make you live on charity.
Well, I hope then that you will support our measures that provide incentives for employers to take on people.
You know what I love?
And also that you'll support our program.
Can I just say
I've been asked something.
Find a job and keep it.
Yeah, so this government tells Australians a whole range of things before the election, brings down a budget which is contrary to what they said and which is fundamentally unfair, and then demands that the Labor Party roll over and support the budget. Well, we're not going to.
Well, you're not even supporting your own savings measure.
Okay. I'm going to say
Labor is not even supporting its own savings measures, which they introduced when they were in government. They're voting against them now.
Let's just hear from Clive Palmer, because once again he might be in a position to stop some of these measures.
Well, I think so, but what we need in our society is more love and compassion. And when you're down and out, when you're down and out, you need self-respect. And you need respect from other people to give you confidence. This is not about building people's self-respect and independence. This is about destroying their character and the feelingness of worthlessness. This is a policy designed to increase our crime rate or to increase youth suicide. That's the reality of it. You can go to the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, like I have. You can go to the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, western suburbs of Melbourne and Tasmania. And there are hundreds of thousands of young people that haven't got jobs, haven't got the ability to find employment, no matter how good they are, and are going to be left homeless with a stark choice of charity, a loss of self-respect, a loss of confidence, or suicide. That's not the society that I'm going to live in. And while I'm an Australian, while I'm in Parliament, and while our senators are in Parliament, they won't let that happen.
OK, just got a few people with their hands up. We'll quickly go around for a couple of comments. That gentleman there, then the young lady behind him. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. I'd like to know if the government wants to get back into surplus, why don't they tax the big banks instead of taxing working people and the pensioners?
OK, we'll take that as a comment. The lady just behind you, go ahead.
Just in regards to work for the dole, it's, you know, it is a good process to get youth and, you know, getting them back into the workforce. But how is the $20 a fortnight payment that you get sufficient enough to assist with travelling for an hour and a half, even if it is on the train service or whatever? It's not enough for young people to be able to survive. The additional $20, considering their rent is generally the entire youth payment, even if they're on the full one, their rent is generally more than that. And so we're putting pressure on people like St Vinny's to assist the youth, and there's just too many of them. OK,
let's go to Warren Truss. Now, you're hearing this. Are the measures that have been proposed so far too harsh?
Well, the Work for the Dole program is not intended to be a permanent lifestyle. It's meant to be a training program to encourage people into other employment where presumably the pay will be a lot better. So what we're trying to do is put incentives into the system, encouragement to employers to take on more people. If we have a stronger economy, that creates more jobs. It's important that we support industries in Australia that have got the capacity to create these extra jobs. In places where there is growth and expansion, let's have people encouraged to move to those areas where there are jobs, and there's incentives in our programs to enable people to do that. So we don't see Work for the Dole as something that's permanent, but we see it as an opportunity for people to gain work skills and to transition to something that will be more, more fulfilling.
We've got another questioner up the back there. Go ahead. That's you, yes.
Clive, as recently as probably mid-2012, you expressed such concern with the budget. You said it was in such dire straits that you wanted to run against the then Treasurer, the architect of the current crisis, for the Liberal Party in his own seat of Lily. How then can you say 2.5 years later to the Australian people, how can you justify rejecting every single measure they've tried to take to put the budget back into surplus? Is this not just populist-driven hypocrisy?
No, it's not. What you've got to understand is this is not a growth budget. If you look at what President Obama's done, it's as bad as Wayne Swan's budget, because what President Obama has done in the United States, for example, in stimulating the economy, has created jobs, has created growth and economic strategy. You have a look at the austerity measures that have been taking place in Europe and Greece and places like that. That's what this government's following. It doesn't create domestic demand. It doesn't create more surplus in the economy. So both of those, the current government and the last government, failed to grasp the challenge of enterprise to make us have growth and more jobs and more exports. And that's what we need to be looking at. If we get rid of the carbon tax, we get rid of the mining tax, fine. What have we got for the economy to go forward? And that's why these budgets are totally unacceptable. They don't create growth, and that's what we should be doing.
Right, Clive, the question's got his hand back up. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just curious as to what's changed since you were a Liberal Party member and you wanted to run against the then Treasurer, the architect of this current crisis. Why was it such a budget crisis then?
Well, what's changed?
You're in a position now, with the balance of power, to actually do something for the country, to actually get the budget on track and push forward with it. What's changed? What's
changed is their policy. Before the election, they said they wouldn't do these things. They had a different policy, and that's what we were supporting. I'm consistent. They're the ones that have changed, and I'm staying where I was.
OK, let's go to another question from Anne Pham.
Given the stalling of the budget, what suggestions do you have or alternatives do you have to ensure the deficit's reduced while still upholding social equality?
Penny Wong.
Well, can I make the first point? Warren was actually, he said something I agreed with, which is that most of the budget has been passed, the core of the budget's been passed, the appropriations bills, and a number of savings measures. Labor has indicated support for, obviously, the additional levy on high income earners, the means testing in relation to family tax benefit, and a range of other measures.
But what is the budget hole that's still left? We're talking tens of billions of dollars.
And what I'd say to you is that how we approach these decisions, I think, can be indicated from the decisions we made in government. We did do some things which were not popular. We did do some difficult things in order to bring the budget back to surplus. We means-tested family tax benefits. We means-tested the private health insurance rebate, something which was vehemently opposed by the opposition. We abolished the baby bonus, which I think was likened to the one-child policy by the current Treasurer. I think our values are really demonstrated by the way we tried to approach those budgets, which were hard decisions, a recognition that you did have to deal with what was then particularly a revenue problem, what was happening to revenues given the global financial crisis, but you don't fix the budget on the backs of the poorest people in Australia.
So that begs the question, it's a question the Prime Minister's asked a number of times of Labor, what would you do? What would you do to bring the budget back into surplus quickly? Well,
we are not in government, and what we will do before the next election is make very clear to Australians how we would handle this. What we are doing as the opposition is looking at measures which are presented to us and making an assessment about whether we believe they're appropriate. And for the reasons I've outlined, a great many of them aren't. Where and how is it a good thing for the nation or for the budget to impose a co-payment on a visit to a GP for all Australians? And to put that money into research fund. It doesn't help the budget bottom line. I think Heather made this point, and it imposes at a part of the health system which would be regarded generally as pretty efficient, a cost which can only act as a disincentive for people to access the health care they need. I don't think that's good policy economically or socially.
Yep. Clive Palmer, what alternatives would you... where would you cut? Where would you actually get the budget back into surplus? Since you obviously consider you're in a position to dictate a lot of policy at the moment.
Well, I don't think that's so. But let me just say that there's only two countries in the OECD that have a balanced budget. That's Uzbekistan and Equatorial Guinea. Now, I don't know if we're trying to get there, to Equatorial Guinea or to Uzbekistan. I mean, that may be a laudable thing to do. Close. But of course, the United States has only had a balanced budget for 12 years in the last 50 years. It's the powerhouse of the world's economy. This whole debate's not about balancing the budget. That's not the most important thing. It's about growth, it's about revenue, it's about a money supply and increasing demand for our citizens and more enterprise. These issues politicians don't even talk about. But that's how the economies run in the world. That's what really happens, and that's what we need to do. Now,
do you care at all about the extent of the deficit? It's
not the most important thing. As I said, with the third lowest deficit, with the third lowest debt in the OECD, we're doing pretty good on that part. So don't get the wrong impression. I've already put a couple of proposals in my discussion to the Treasurer on what can be done for the economy and growth, and he's been good enough to have them costed by the Budget Office, and we're negotiating things like that.
Are you able to tell us what they are?
I don't want to betray his confidences, but we'll wait and see what the outcome is that. So we are making positive suggestions, and the government is being reasonably responsive.
Heather Ridout, I'll just bring you in here because it was said by Andrew Robb, I think, in the past 24 hours, that the budget situation is putting Australia at sovereign risk. Very serious suggestion. Do you agree with it?
Well, look, I haven't read all of Andrew's remarks, but I think it was also in the context of overseas investment coming here, the US looking at us with a scant eye. I mean, I've just
sovereign risk is when no one wants to invest here because they think the place is going to rack and ruin.
We are getting lots of investment, and I don't think the US political situation or economic situation is anything to get too excited about compared to Australia, particularly the political situation. But, you know, I think we do have a medium-term budget problem. We certainly do have one. We've got an ageing population. We have a healthcare system where the marginal cost is rising, not falling. We've got, more older people and younger people coming through the system. We do need to have an approach to it, and the business community is very strong about this. And the business community supports large parts of the budget, but we just have to set out a medium-term strategy to get there, and it has to take account of all the impacts along the way.
Truss,
I think that's what people are looking for.
Truss, there doesn't seem to be a sense that there is a budget emergency on this panel at least, including from former business lobbyist and member of the Reserve Bank, obviously from the other panellists. Are you worried that the measures you've tried to put in place are actually doomed and you're going to have to think of something completely different, like a mini budget?
Well, it does concern me that Clive and others are saying that the debt doesn't matter, that there are other people who've got a worse debt than us, so therefore we shouldn't worry about it. Never forget, we are paying over $1 billion every month on the interest on this debt. Now, if we had that extra $1 billion, we could give you the extra homeless accommodation that you want. We could be doing a whole lot more things to create jobs. We could be building more roads. And if the debt trajectory that we inherited when we came to office was allowed to rise to its $667 billion peak, that would mean we'd be paying $3 billion every month on interest.
Okay,
that does matter. That does matter. That is hurting you now. It means you can't have a lot of the things you want now. It means that future generations also will not be able to have the things that they want.
So in order...
So much is going to have to be paid in interest.
Let me just bring you quickly, very briefly, to the question that I just asked. Will you be forced into a mini-budget because the measures you've proposed so far to save money are not going to get through?
Well, what we have done is already get through a significant proportion of the budget through the Parliament. Some of the other measures that as I mentioned to you, don't even take effect for quite some time.
All right, so you're saying it's not a priority anymore?
Well, it's clearly a priority for us to get the reform agenda through the Parliament if we can, because the sooner we make these reforms, the sooner we can start turning the budget around and getting us in a more healthy situation. But some of these things, there is time to talk. There is a willingness to talk, but what we do need to have is a solid commitment to reducing the debt so that we don't have to pay interest, which is essentially wasted money that we can't spend on the things that you want now.
Let's be clear about...
Sorry, no, well, I did hear from John Falzon's trying to get in. He hasn't had a chance to talk.
I just have to come in here to say that we need to punish the homeless in order to be able to provide homelessness services into the future. Just beggars belief. I refuse to accept that it is the poorest in our community who should be having to bear the biggest burden in having to fix this deficit. That is just not on.
So the question was about solutions. Do you have any?
Yes, absolutely, yes. First of all, we need to look at ways of broadening our revenue base. We have a suite of recommendations from the Henry Review. I'm not going to go into them in detail now, but I'm very happy to, but I'm sure you won't.
Well, briefly, raise the GST. That's one. Raise and broaden the base.
That wasn't a recommendation of the Henry Review.
And that isn't what I'm thinking of either.
No, Henry Review wasn't allowed to look at that.
Well,
but
we did
the next tax review will.
If you really want to look at savings, well, we could certainly spend a lot less on our detention system for these poor people that are seeking asylum in our country. We're spending huge amounts of money there. We're also spending an absolute wasteful amount on compulsory income management, telling people in poverty how to spend their meagre amount of money. And we're spending money to do that, to control their lives, to humiliate and disempower them. Yeah. So I completely reject the idea that we need to ramp up inequality in order to fix this deficit. You know, this is based on this myth, this fiction of the trickle-down. You know, if we're patient enough, the wealth will trickle down if we get the budget back into black. Well, I'm still waiting for the wealth to trickle down. I can't hear the wealth trickling down. What I can hear is the sound of the excluded still waiting.
Yeah, well, listen, Tony.
Have to be very brief.
I'm going to say something quickly. We can scrap paid parental leave. That'll give us $20 billion. We can change the NBN. I know that Warren's a fan of Stephen Conroy. We can change the NBN, take $7 billion, hit the blind spot, save another $30 billion. We can buy our submarines overseas that work instead of build ones here that don't, save another $20 billion. We can save $2.5 billion on our direct action schemes which we don't have at the moment. Now, all of that is more money than they've got in the budget. If they're running a bloody business, why don't they do it?
All right, with that back-of-the-envelope solution, we could talk about the budget all night, but we do have some other issues to discuss. Our next question comes from Nima Zahidi.
Thank you, Tony. I would like to direct my question to Penny Wong. As the former Minister for Climate Change, what are your thoughts on Maurice Newman recently launching into an embarrassing attack on climate science, this time stating that Australians should be preparing for global cooling? In the face of overwhelming scientific evidence for global warming, should we not be concerned that Maurice Newman is the chief business advisor to an already climate change sceptic Prime Minister?
And Penny Wong, I think that is Maurice Newman. He's talking about his French cousin. But Maurice Newman obviously did make these remarks.
Yes. And as your question indicates, that they're out of step with the overwhelming majority of peer-reviewed and respected scientists about what is happening. I don't think it's... I was Minister for Climate Change, negotiated with Heather. We actually came to an agreement on a carbon price. That's a long time ago,
We came to an agreement with Warren's party as well.
There you go, that's right.
No, you didn't.
Yes, we... Oh, well, no, the Liberal Party.
We came to agreement with the Liberal Party till they did Malcolm Turnbull over. That's what actually happened.
Then you came to agreement... Then you came to an agreement with the Greens and gave a carbon price that stayed in for 5 years, which was actually not a very good idea politically.
Sure. No. I think we were in the second best world. Always thought on this issue bipartisanship was better, but regrettably that moment passed. But yeah, I think it is a great concern that we have the Prime Minister being advised by someone who holds views which are really not consistent with the mainstream science. But more importantly, leaving aside the individual, I think it's a concern that we're still having this argument. Like, what evidence more do leaders, community leaders, youth leaders, political leaders, business leaders need of the risk to us and to our grandchildren for us to stop having a threshold argument about whether we need to take out some insurance and do something about it and getting on to actually do it?
OK, Warren Truss, what did you make of Maurice Newman's claim that the world is actually cooling and we should prepare for that rather than warming?
Well, the Prime Minister gets advice from lots of people, not exclusively Maurice Newman, and I'm sure he weighs the various issues up and comes to a position which hopefully finds a better direction for our approach to these sorts of issues.
Penny Wong asked the obvious question, is he wrong? Because the scientists, most of them believe that the world is warming and he believes it's cooling.
Well, I think we need to listen to all the scientists, and certainly there are scientists who have different views, and one thing that I thought everybody believed around the table was that we should be open to whatever views are being expressed. However, what is absolutely clearly obviously the fact that a tax on Australians, a carbon tax on Australians, has done absolutely nothing to address climate change and never will. Now, we have about 1% of global emissions. Any response has to be done on a global basis, and that global response is not apparent at the present time.
Okay, very briefly,
so we do need to look at new ways of responding to these issues.
The question was specifically about Maurice Newman and what he actually said, and I asked you, do you agree with him?
Well, I wouldn't have used those words.
That's a no then, is it?
I wouldn't have used those words.
What words would you use?
Well, I think that, that it's important for us to address these sorts of issues, and we need to do it in a constructive way through direct action so that we're able to achieve things that are good in this country, irrespective of what other parts of the world might do.
Yeah, I think that had the sort of ring of what Tony Abbott said about Joe Hockey's comment about the fuel tax and driving. Is it sort of kiss of death to say I wouldn't put it that way?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way.
Heather Ridout, briefly.
Look, I think we keep going back over this argument. Both political parties, even though the bipartisanship about the package broke down, they agree that the global is warming and the humans are contributing to it. They agreed with the same target, with the same date on it. So while we keep going back and having this debate about whether the science is true,
the reason is, if I may, obviously bring you back to the question. Yes. The reason is because the Prime Minister's chief economic advisor.
But Maurice has a view about these issues, and it's well known, and he writes his opinion pieces, and we have a broad church, and that's fair enough. But basically, the mainstream policy around this is already agreed between the political parties, and it's not helpful, I don't think, that we keep going back, revisiting the science, because the science is really incontrovertible about this issue. You know, it's very hard for the world to do something together for future generations. The world can't do something together anyway, let alone for future generations. And this is a challenge around climate. Right. And it's a really difficult one. But it doesn't help when we have leadership all over the place on it. And I think Warren's going back to where the whole issue does sit, that there is bipartisanship agreement around the science and how we've got to move forward.
OK, let's go to Clive Palmer, because not so long ago you didn't believe the science, now you do.
Well, I just want to say for everybody so they realise that the world is actually flat. We're living in a flat world. That's what we have to believe if we believe the sort of stuff you've just heard Morris say. But I'd just say that on the 17th of November...
It's the sort of stuff you used to believe.
Well, you have to have an open mind and change when you see things. Tony, I know you've been stuck in your views for years, but you've got to think more and critically analyse them, you know. But all I would say is that at the G20 this year, there's a lot of countries that want to talk about the climate change, but it's not on the agenda. So on the 17th of November, one day after G20, we're having a climate change conference at Palmaculam Resort, where we'll have international leaders from all over the world and the globe talking about climate change. And we'll invite Warren, he can come along if he wants to, right? And,
Clive, can I just interrupt there, because I did read today that apparently your conference is going to focus on the need to have a global emissions trading scheme. How does that square with the fact that you just voted to get rid of the one here?
Well, what you'll find next week in the Senate, we're introducing a ETS, which, like Warren says, in accordance with Liberal Party policy, will take effect when our main trading partners have an ETS, because it is a global solution. Air moves around the world. So we'll be standing up in the Senate, putting that ETS before the Australian people and trying to introduce it. Because we have to realise that if we want to trade with other countries and they have an ETS, they won't allow our products to enter unless we have a similar scheme. And that's something.
Well, let's just find out if you got Labor's vote on this.
We don't know.
I'm about to ask Penny Wong.
Well, we haven't seen this. We haven't seen the most recent iteration, but
they support an ETS generally.
Our position is well known on this, and you know.
Would you like to see a Palmer version of an ETS, and will you consider it seriously and possibly vote for it?
I wanted a Labor version of an ETS.
Well, we've copied their version, actually, so...
So you got rid of it and now you're going to bring it back?
No, but we're bringing it back on certain conditions, and that was if there's a ETS operable in our main trading partners, you know, United States, China, Japan, Korea and Europe. And what's wrong with that? Because we don't want to move alone. We want to know that it's happening everywhere, and we need a global solution. That's why we've got Al Gore and other people pushing that.
Those other countries are doing a lot about climate change.
They are.
They're doing an awful lot about it, even if they haven't got a national ETS. I mean, the US has got ETSs. They've got a lot of direct action. They've got a lot of regulation. There's almost a surrogate.
Well, if you look at our bill, it deals with equivalence.
The Chinese are doing an awful lot. The way carbon is being dealt with at a multilateral level now is at a bottom-up approach. Not the top-down, you set a world target and off you go. It's much more what countries can do. And that's what the Paris conference next year is going to be all about. So I think we have to live in that new world and find our way through it. And,
well, if you look at what New Zealand's done, for example...
But I think the ETS, waiting for the world, is like, you know, like the one, Clayton's ETS, the one you have when you don't have one.
OK, I'm going to move on because we've got a few other questions to get to. This one's from Kate Applegarth.
Yesterday on Insiders, journalist David Marr said, "This country needs a federal ICAC and any politician who stands in its way will have to explain themselves." His comments echoed the sentiment of many Australians who struggle to believe that the dirty deals in New South Wales politics miraculously stop at the ACT border. To the federal politicians on the panel, do you believe there should be a federal ICAC? And if not, why not?
Warren Truss.
Well, I think to establish such a body, you'd have to argue that the current systems in place are either not working or have failed or to deal with issues. We have a capacity to establish royal commissions that have investigatory powers. There's a couple of those going at the present time into particular instances of concern. To have a standing committee of this nature, I think to justify that, you would have to be able to establish that there were issues of concern that couldn't be addressed with the existing arrangements that are in place. There are obviously serious issues in New South Wales, and it's, I think, a distressing situation, and it's a reflection on the body politic and even to some extent on the way in which our democracy works, that there's been these kinds of clearly moral failures in the New South Wales system.
Tony Abbott seemed to be suggesting today the real problem is the electoral funding laws in New South Wales. I mean, is he right?
Well, I think they do.
These New South Wales politicians just sort of conscientious objectors?
No, I think in reality there are issues with political party funding that perhaps ought to be addressed, and there have been occasions when the major political parties have been talking about a way in which we might be able to ensure that the system is funded without the need to reach out to trade unions or to business or other sectors to help to provide the funding.
No, I don't think that's the point he was... I think the point he was making was it's a complicated set of laws when you can't take money from developers.
Well, I agree that in New South Wales there are a range of additional rules in place that don't exist in other states that have added to the complexity, and some of those rules then have sort of came in later, and that has made it even more difficult. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for what's gone on in New South Wales.
It's a bit hard when people driving around in Rolls Royces throwing packets of money out the window.
Let me say, I lead a party with very meagre resources that is not able to challenge the big parties for what's able to be allocated to political campaigning.
Okay.
We've relied on our grassroots membership over the years, but we do actually need support from the corporate sector for us to be able to survive as a political organisation, and we don't have a wealthy benefactor who names the party after himself, and so in reality what we have to do is make sure that we work hard at a local level to raise the money to be a grassroots organisation so that we can faithfully represent the people.
You probably had your chance. LNP could have been Liberal National Palmer. He probably would have accepted that. Penny Wong.
No, he'd want Palmer first. Absolutely.
Penny Wong.
Well, can I first pick up on the reference you made to the Prime Minister's comments where he said the problem in New South Wales is that there are laws banning developer donations.
He didn't say it exactly like that.
No, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing. The problem is that people have behaved corruptly. It's not that the laws are problematic or complex. The problem is that people have tried to get around those bans by the arrangements which have been, in the papers for some time. And obviously here in New South Wales it's been a very big focus for a long time.
Well, yes, quite a long time, because here in New South Wales political corruption is bipartisan.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to make a... I don't like White Ryan. I don't run away from the Labor's, some Labor members' roles in this.
So should there be a federal ICAC? Just
coming back to the question, I think that the view that has been put is that there are bodies which already exist in the federal sphere which have powers which are not analogous to existing bodies in the state parliamentary process. So the Australian Crime Commission, which has the standing powers of a Royal Commission, the Commonwealth Ombudsman, which is obviously has quite extensive powers, and let's be frank also, the Australian Senate, which I think you'd have to say is a body which certainly scrutinises the activities of the executive and others, probably to a greater level than most upper houses. So I think the general view has been that we already have arrangements at the federal level which provide for the sort of scrutiny that you're describing.
Clive Palmer.
Well, the problem really is it's a bit of a cesspool, the whole country. If you go across to Queensland, New South Wales, we've got too many lobbyists getting paid by business and by other interest groups to do their bidding. We see chiefs of staff, we see ministerial advisors moving from their position to lobbyists. It's a really bad situation. That's how I see it. That's how I've said we need to revisit it, and I think we need to be ever vigilant. And
could you be potentially, if there was a federal ICAC, a target?
Well, I don't mind being a target. I've been a target for everybody else in the last couple of years.
Well, you're facing serious allegations that you funneled money from more than $12 million, that's the allegation, out of the Port Palmer operations to fund your election campaign. Is it true that that money was spent on your election campaign?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that for you, Tony, but of course that's going to go up to the Supreme Court this week and it'll all be down. What that's all about is that we're owed about $500 million by the Communist Chinese government that doesn't want to pay it, that's now reverting this sort of rubbish.
That's not what that's all about, actually. I mean, from that account, there's $2.17 million.
That's what it's about.
$2.17 million of that account went to a company called Media Circus. How much of that?
I'm just trying to
just ask you how much of that was spent on your election campaign?
No, you can't, because that'll go before the Supreme Court. We'll be knocking that case out because it's a lie, it's not true, and we'll deal with that matter. You've been reading too much of The Australian and what Rupert Murdoch's telling you from New York. It's just not true.
Let's put it this way, because obviously there are serious implications. If you are caught doing something wrong...
It's not trial by media, Tony, even though you'd like to help Rupert.
This is trial by... I'm asking questions. It's not a trial
I'm telling you, I'll just tell you again, It's not true, it's false, and we'll be suing this week. It'll be in the Supreme Court. You can report it on the ABC and this will be thrown out. But it won't stop the fact that the Chinese government wants to bring workers here to destroy our wage system. It won't stop the fact that they want to take over our ports and get our resources for free. So far, they've shipped $200 million worth of iron ore out of this country without paying for it.
Okay.
And I don't mind standing up against the Chinese bastards and stopping them from doing it. And I'll be doing that, mate. Don't worry about that.
Simple question, just leaving...
Well, that's what it's about,
leaving
Tony.
that aside.
That's what it's about. It's not about $12 million. You know, this is a $10 billion project.
$12 million is quite a lot of money. So, no, I'm just asking, can you put your hand on your heart in front of this audience now and say that not a cent of that $12 million went into my election campaign?
I'm not going to answer questions that you put in my mouth, my friend. I can tell you that those allegations are not true. The relief they seek isn't true, and we're taking immediate action in the Supreme Court to take it out. That I'll be commencing proceedings against the lawyers that have said it, that have breached their oath of honesty to the court, that they know it's false, and we've got evidence to show that they know it's false, and they're acting for an improper purpose, abusing processes.
I'm not putting this in your mouth. It's a simple question.
They're just doing it
it's
to
a simple question whether or not
I'm not on trial here, Tony. You're not the judge. You come along to the court if you want to get the answer next week and find out. You're not the judge, but I'm just telling you, I'm not going to let their tactics of bluster and trying to have a go at people in this country stop people from defending our national assets. It's their legal tactic. That's all it is.
So when will you answer the question about the 12
Well,
million?
I'm in court next week. I've told you 3 times. But it's not up to you. That's not your job. You're not a judicial officer. We'll be suing them, and they'll be answering the question. We've had 3 judgments in the Federal Court, in the Supreme Court of Western Australia, and an arbitration against these Chinese mongrels. I'm saying that's because they're communists, because they shoot their own people, they haven't got a justice system, and they want to take over this country. And we're not going to let them do it.
We've got time for just one more question. One more question. It's from Katie Gamara. Go ahead, Katie.
I'll be voting for the very first time. So I would like all the members of the panel to convince me who I should vote for. Yeah.
OK.
Well, I've spent my career being...
This young lady's from Sierra Leone, and it's a simple question. It's a confusing set of circumstances. You're looking at Australian politics. Who would you reckon?
You know, one of the most confusing things is that New South Wales has all these problems, yet the new government in New South Wales is doing a really good job. Unemployment, it's the 2nd lowest in Australia now. It's attracting more people, attracting more investment. So you have this perverse political situation where you have a big problem with electoral funding, but you have a government that's come in and has done a pretty good job. And Mike Baird, all strength to his arm, because I think he's a decent guy. My view about politics, you have to have a set of values yourself, and then you have to measure them against the party, and that's how you have to approach it. I've always had a very strong view about what I like about Australia. Very strong safety net. When we're buoyant economically, we can strengthen it, as we did with the old paid parental leave scheme, not this newfangled thing, the old one. And then everybody has to have a crack above that. And political parties that operate from the centre usually abide by that kind of construct. And that's how I see it.
OK, Warren Truss, we'll go to you.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I hope that when you vote for the first time, you will choose a party that shares your values. That wants to make your new country strong, to provide opportunities in the future for you to achieve your objectives in Australia, but also to ensure that we are able, as a caring society, to be able to look after those who need help in our community. We want a strong economic plan so that we're able to deliver strong social objectives. And I think we also want an inclusive society where all the great people that make up our country are keen and willing to work together for our mutual benefit. And when we help one another, we become proud of our country, and the rest of the world is then looking at Australia and saying, this is the kind of place that we can rely upon to be a reliable partner and to play its role, its rightful role around the globe.
Penny Wong.
I think the question when you vote is what sort of community do you want? What sort of nation do you want? And that does come back to your values. And I'd also encourage you to stay interested. Like, one of the things I always say to young people when I go to schools, which I actually think is the best thing, pretty much one of the best things you get to do as a politician, is you get to go and talk to a lot of schools. And I always say you can make a decision not to be interested in politics, but you can actually never make a decision not to be affected by it. And so if you're going to be affected, you may as well be a bit interested. So that's what I'd say to you. I could give you a pitch about Labor and fairness, but I hope tonight on the panel you've seen some of that. What I'd say to you is fundamentally it's a decision about what sort of community you think we should have and what sort of nation you think we should have.
Clive Palmer.
Well, I think you should vote for somebody and so that you believe is best for you and for your circumstances and will do the most for your community. I think one of the big things we've got in Australia is democracy, where we've got a polarity of decision-making, and the more we have that, the better off we are. So I'd encourage more diversity of opinion. Just like we've got a lot of people that come from different countries of the world, they make the economy, the country, everyone richer. Just the same thing's true in politics. It's not our party at difference to Penny's or Warren's. The fact we can have these debates means that we can really have a free society. In the final analysis, that's what I think is really important for Australia.
And John Falzon.
Thank you for your beautiful question, Kiba. I would say three things. Firstly, the great feminist insight from Carol Harnish from the title of an essay she wrote in 1969, "The personal is political." That's the first principle. Secondly, I would say that there's a great quote from Augustine of Hippo who said, "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are and courage to make sure that they do not remain the way they are." And thirdly, I would say to you that, you know, all good policy comes from below. All of the great social achievements in this country, this is real active democracy, the great achievements have come from below by ordinary people demanding change under the guiding stars of struggle and hope. So I'll just leave you with the beautiful words of the late great Aboriginal poet Bobby Sykes, who said, and this is what we need, a revolution, a change in the way our country is run so that people come before profits. She said, the revolution is alive while it lives within us, beating, making our hearts warm, our minds strong, for we know that justice is inevitable like birth.
Thank you very much. That is all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Heather Ridout, John Falzon, Warren Truss, Penny Wong and Clive Palmer. Thank you. Next Monday we'll be in Melbourne with a rather more literary Q&A. We'll be joining the Melbourne Writers' Festival with former Foreign Minister and global crisis guru Gareth Evans, leading political journalist Paul Kelly, epidemiologist and Indonesian observer, author Elizabeth Pisani, and the first black African woman to be shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, Zimbabwean novelist No Violet Bulawayo. Until next week's Q&A, good night.